As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road. Let's camera action.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
All right. We ready? Good morning. My name is Gary Tinney, and I'm sitting in for Tom Ficklin. I would like to introduce you to Jeffrey Fletcher, the founder of the Ruby Calvin Fletcher Afro-American History Museum. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Gary. Thank you for having me this morning.
If you could please introduce yourself.
Yes, sir. I am, as your host, Gary Tinney, has mentioned, I am Jeffrey Fletcher. I am the president of the African American Collections Incorporated, which is a 501c3, and also the executive director of the Ruby and Calvin Fletcher African American History Museum, located at 952 East Broadway in Stratford, Connecticut.
Thank you. So let's start off with just tell me a little bit about your journey. I was fortunately I was able to visit the museum numerous times, and I can't tell you how taken back I was by, visually and what I heard from you and the history of the museum. It just it really I learned a lot. So if you could just walk us through your journey and tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, so it's basically a passion. It has turned into a passion, but then I've learned that it also turned into a journey involving history, but as well as family legacy. So this all started, as for those that don't know who I really am and where I came from, I grew up in a small rural community in southeastern Connecticut called Colchester, Connecticut. And a lot of folks may not know where that is, but it's tucked away up by Norwich and New London and Ledyard and the casinos. And my parents, Ruby and Calvin, they migrated from the South Carolina and North Carolina. My mom from Camden, South Carolina. My dad from a place called Fuquay Farina, North Carolina. But their journey to get here was part of the Great Black Migration, as African Americans were fleeing the South due to Jim Crow laws, segregation, housing, and unemployment rates were skyrocketing. So they made the journey across this country, many African Americans, and they landed to where they are today. Many folks, as we know, in New Haven had done the same thing my parents did on that journey from South Carolina. But they met in Colchester, where they raised 4 children. But the interesting part about this story and this journey was that my mom, who grew up in Camden, South Carolina, and if you're familiar with the logo of the museum, you'll see a tree, but you'll see a shack. And that shack is indicative of where my mom grew up in Camden, South Carolina, on a sharecropper's farm with her 7 brothers and sisters and my grandparents. And the tree represents the elm tree, Connecticut elm tree, which they are now interned in Colchester in our local cemetery there. So there was a beginning and there was an end. But the end didn't stop there, because when my mom passed, who was the main motivator of this museum for me to do it, the passion and legacy, she was a collector at an early age in growing up in the South. And she collected a lot of objects. Man, a lot of our Black families would have seen these objects. They would have seen these objects in their grandparents, great-grandparents' homes, salt, pepper shakers, and a lot of ephemera type of objects. And my mom collected this stuff, not knowing where it will end up some 40, 50 years later. But as she collected these objects, it meant something to her. And upon her passing, I inherited the collection, which was about 450 objects. And to this day, I've amassed about 12,500 pieces of artifacts that I have collected throughout the 15 years after retirement from the City of New Haven Police Department. So this journey started back in the 1930s with my parents, and it ended up in my hands. And here we are in Stratford, Connecticut, where this museum is now officially located. And it is the first African American history museum of its type in the Northeast.
If you could identify that defining moment when you said to yourself, I'm going to make this happen, I'm going to move forward on this.
Well, I mean, part of the question I got, I heard the last part of it, the identify questions.
Yeah, I'll repeat. If you could identify that defining moment when you said, okay, I'm going to take this on, I'm going to make this happen.
Okay. So upon receiving the collection, because my mom passed before my dad, and when I got the collection, went home and retrieved the things that my mom had stored for my brother and my sisters to take with us, because she kept everything. Everything from hand pot holders and pictures and everything that she compiled in bins for us. But when I took these objects that were given to me from her, or by my dad and her, I took them to my home, and I took them to my home in Branford, Connecticut, where I reside. And what I did was I laid them out, and I did not realize exactly the scope of what I was looking at until several weeks later, as I'm transitioning out of the police department, that career. And I went back into my basement and I looked at everything on the floor, and I realized that my mom had a story behind her collection. And so it wasn't until that point that I decided to say, I gotta continue this legacy, but I'm sure she had a story that she wanted to tell using her collection to share with folks in schools and civic organizations and even communities. And so that's when I decided that, I would start packing this stuff up and knocking on doors in New Haven, Hartford, Bridgeport, Waterbury, and basically whoever wanted sit and talk to me and look at this, as I called it back then, stuff. So that was, I think, the defining moment when I realized that my mom had a story behind these objects.
Wow, that's amazing. And for you to be able to put this whole thing together, I can't tell you. I remember when I think I was there with the one of the groups there, I think the Lynx.
Yes.
Had a trip there, and I can't tell you the conversations and the response from folks. Folks are just, when we see certain things, sometimes we don't know the meaning.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have anything close to you that you could show, or
yeah,
and speak to, again, yeah. I mean, there you go. We've seen that over the years on the box, and but we never really knew some of us didn't know the meaning behind it. So if you could just speak to some of your collections and what what they meant.
Yeah. So we, as I said, I've enhanced the collection twofold, and especially like the object that you just saw in my hand. Those objects represent a time in our history where African Americans were depicted as servants, servants, butlers, and that sort of thing. But the ironic part about this is, as people, African Americans, they collected those objects as well as white folks, but we collected them for more of a sentimental value. White folks collected those objects because they were dehumanizing, they were negative, and plus it casted all sorts of bias and bigotry to these, and used to dehumanize people of color. I tend to take these negative objects that we may sometimes interpret as being negative towards African American people, and use them as an educational piece in talking about how perception and stereotypes are born. And but over the years, these pieces have actually been conversation pieces, especially that piece. But again, a lot of my foundation for what we're doing here is to discuss those hard things that we have issues with today. And both sides, black and white, have difficult times, especially African American people. They have a difficult time seeing this hard history. White folks these days are looking at it as taboo to even try to discuss or talk about, because they want to be either sensitive or socially correct when they talk about these objects. Here at this museum, we encourage open and free conversation, because in order for us to move forward, we have to come from out of the dark and talk openly about what these objects represent and how much of an impact they may have on either side of the line there, whether you're black or whether you're white. So these objects are very important, and I don't think my mom realized that at the time, but I think through spirituality and divine intervention, she's invoking those thoughts every day as I come into this museum, and we do tours in the museum as well as do outside presentations to organizations and schools.
Wow. Now, if I may, where's your mom from? Your mom and dad?
My mom is from Camden, South Carolina, and that's a little bit inland. It's not on the coast. My dad is from Fuquay, Farina, North Carolina, which is just outside Raleigh. My mom, as I said, and her 7 brothers and sisters and my grandparents, they lived on a sharecropper's farm, which was a 3-room house, as you might see sometimes as you're venturing southbound on I-95. Once you get past the Mason-Dixon, you'll look out in the fields and you'll see these shacks that are out in the middle of this acres of land. So those were the type of dwellings that she lived in, and they had to work those farms in order to stay there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to I'm thinking, I'm just going through a couple of months ago, I went on a tour in the Hilton Head and around the Gullah Islands. And I went on a Gullah tour, and the gentleman that narrated everything, he was phenomenal. He's from the Gullah Islands. He walked us through the whole journey, and that's what I'm thinking about right now. I learned so much from that tour. It was one of the best tours I've ever been on. Mm-hmm. And the rich history, and you talk about sharecroppers, but he spoke in depth about folks, where they came from, where they were picked up, they brought us in and enslaved us. If you could just speak to that a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. So my mom, although she understands Gullah because they're descendants that are relatives of hers, and if you're around folks, and we have them in New Haven, Connecticut, mm-hmm. and worked with some folks who were entrenched in their roots, or they say their roots are from South Carolina. And, excuse me. And so if you're fortunate enough and you are around that group of people from the South, especially along the coastline, you will hear the Gullah dialect. And it's very, very fascinating, very interesting. And I guarantee you will not understand it, because it has a mixture of Creole, Spanish, a little French, a little English, and like a patois, as they would be, as West Indian folks would be using in their dialect, in their conversation. So it's a very complicated language. But again, my mom understood that, and she understood the fact of being called a Geechee was not a bad thing, because her diet, and even as she got older and came north and raising a family, our diets consisted of rice, cabbage, fish, and very rarely do we eat meat. And so, that whole area in the South, it was rich in culture, as you already witnessed by going on that tour. And, the museum is, we talk about that. We talk about the travels, the transatlantic voyage, or the middle passages from the continent of Africa. And you'll see displayed in the museum where we recreated a hull of a slave ship. And in that hull of a slave ship, if you've seen Gary yourself, it maps and it tracks how many souls were taken, kidnapped, and from the continent and dropped off all across this world. But if you look at the map and see the journey from Africa all the way to the south of South Carolina, where it was the hub and the port of slaves and then becoming enslaved were brought into. It's astounding to see the traffic not only in South Carolina but along the Caribbean as well. And one of the things that I'm excited about with the museum is that we will be including Latinx culture and history in this museum, because we do get a enormous amount of traffic from Hispanic folks that come in to see this exhibit, and a lot of them, they're bewildered when we don't expound and talk about the Latinx culture being involved or integrated into the African culture. And we now are looking to intensify these exhibits in the museum, because the Hispanic culture and spirituality and food, music, and dance is so aligned to Africa and the original ancestors who have made it successfully. And I say successfully, not with any type of fanfare or glee, but painfully made it across the Atlantic to the islands, and their strong culture and history was enmeshed into the hybrid of those islands.
So when you mention that, so you look at some of the Caribbean islands, when you think of the islands where folks were dropped off and enslaved, and can you just name some of them? I mean, you spoke.
Puerto Rico, Haiti, St. Martin's, all of the islands that we will visit today as tourists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we will vacation there. It's kind of like the bastion of going to some sort of Mecca, where it was. It's a great place, but and I have a fellow colleague, retired police supervisor, who's from, you might know her. She's from St. Martin's, Lieutenant Captain Pat Hellinger, and she's Patty's from St. Martin's, and she's very active in that St. Martin, the island, in government. And one of the things that we're working on is trying to get me to get there to spread some of this information about slavery and the whole industry, what was going on here in the States. So St. Martin's is one of those islands, Haiti, Jamaica, because they were under European or British rule. And where did slavery evolve from? Basically, I mean, we could say it goes back as far as the before the pyramids. That's correct, but it was more pronounced as it evolved from England. And the slave trade was very strong from England, and then it branched out. But the islands are heavily influenced with African culture and history.
Now, are you going to different schools and sharing your knowledge in the history of?
Well, I'm still a student, so when you say knowledge, I want to make sure, and I should have prefaced this before. I am not an expert, right? And I don't hold any degrees in anthropology or African American history. I am I'm passionate. I love our history. I'm still learning. When folks come through this museum, they drop nuggets of intellect on our history. So I'm constantly learning. But to that question, we do reach out to elementary, junior high schools, colleges, and as I said earlier, to whoever feels the need that they want to use this museum as a tool or a vehicle to help in their curriculums. And one of the things that I'm proud to say is that we have, being that I come from 25 plus years in law enforcement, and with the increase of police versus Black and brown citizens, I have used this museum and some of its pieces to talk about perception of how when a police officer violates the civil rights or the lives of African American and brown folks, this is how they're perceived. So I go into these academies and I go into these police departments and I do these programs where we discuss how you are perceived and why you are not trusted in our urban communities. And we talk about this, and then I show them some of the objects that would make a black or brown person not be trustful of you. And 9 times out of 10, it resonates. And what it does is it gives these officers another tool to put in their utility belt to help them do their job better when they are encountering people of color. So we've worked in East Haven Police Department when, unfortunately, that whole situation occurred in that community years ago, and we were still young at the time, and we were asked by the State Department to go in and do several days of a program, in which we did. And we're connected to Bridgeport Police Department, and we just had a couple workshops at the City of New Haven Training Academy as well. So this museum just isn't a place where we have a bunch of stuff. We use this museum to help teachers in building their curriculums, especially as these courses, AP courses, and African American history is not a required course, but it's called an elective, which I think it should be required on the educational level in order to graduate. But needless to say, this museum serves as a tool for teachers to enhance their curriculums, but also their knowledge in teaching their students when it comes time to talk about African American history.
Wow. So that goes to my next point, the importance of African American history and how relevant it is to what we're experiencing today, what we're seeing today in today's society. Sometimes I run into folks who say, let the past be the past, or, that's doesn't make sense.
That was then, this is now. That's
right. So when I hear that, it's just so, and what we're experiencing today, it just seems like we're possibly setting folks up. If we don't know our history, then that puts us in a place where we don't know what direction to go in. If we don't know where we came from, we don't know what direction to go in. So I'm constantly, when I speak to some of the folks that I mentor, knowing the history, I show them, I share all the books that I have. I ask them to really look into like Paul Robeson, his journey. There's so many heroes and sheroes that we have. If they watch the new movie, Harriet, her journey, there's a woman that she escaped and then she went back, I think, 30 times to save more folks. And through those swamps, and I know with looking at those swamps and going through the little tours that I go on, I would have never been able to do that. So I think about the courage and the fortitude and faith, having that faith and that strength to persevere and move through all that mess. It's just, I just don't know. I have to, I thank God for their strength and what the foundation they've laid for us. So if we go back to, again, the importance of our history and how relevant it is to today.
Yeah. So, I tell folks too, what you just said, every time we have a group of people that come through here, or organization or schools that come through, or individuals, we try to get out here and do these tours. We don't let folks walk through the front door and just randomly walk through, because you can interpret, and this is very, very sensitive but difficult history for people to understand. And so they need some sort of assistance on the motivation of this, and certain areas in this museum that they need explanation. And when you talk about people coming through the museum and they look like you and I, and they automatically say, that was then, this is now, I know all this history because I lived it. I tell them, you didn't live this history, because if you did, you and I can go out and make some money, because that tells me that you you are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which we all know what that means. And that tells me that you were around that period of time, slavery, early Jim Crow. So this history is hard for you. So I say we got to stop making excuses for why we do not want to see more of this history. But I often tell folks that when they finish going through this museum and we go into a space we call the decade space, where we honor and celebrate those Black heroes and sheroes who have defied Jim Crow, defied discrimination, bigotry. And I say, those folks on the wall there that we see, the Michael Jordans, the Beyoncés, the Jay-Z's, the Magic Johnsons, and so forth, Denzel, Spike Lee's, they're standing on some very, very tall, broad shoulders, as I and you are, right? Because think about 50, 60 years ago, even here in Stratford, Connecticut, I would not be here, right? And we know that the demographics were very different in this community, as well as various communities around the state of Connecticut. So I use this museum as a epidemiology study often, because it is, as I called, a litmus test to see our knowledge, our acceptance, and if we are going to support, and if we're going to talk about evening the playing field, or if we're talking about trying to change the minds of people, we have to look at the things that are important and helping to change those minds to make lives better for African American folks, instead of sitting back waiting for things to come our way. And so that's why one of the motivating factors here was we don't have an African American history. We have no institution to tell our narrative. The closest narrative that we can tell is on the Yale campus, Yale University campus, the Gelman Center. Those folks do some good work there, right? They do a lot of academic research work, right? And they delve into the past. But I think we are different from the Gelman Center, who has probably outfunded us heads and shoulders. But we bring our history across the board, and we just don't focus on one area, which is the migration or the migratory practices of Africans that were kidnapped from Africa, taken from the continent, and dispersed all across the world. So we get in some really heavy, deep conversations and discussions. Had a deep discussion yesterday for 45 minutes with the Secretary Vice President of Yale, Miss Kimberly Goff Cruz. And it was very entertaining, but very enlightening. And I learned a lot of what Yale is doing. So they're doing a lot of work there, but I think there's more work that can be done. And I think with a strong collaboration and partnership, this whole thing can work out, because this museum has Yale connection, right? Mm-hmm. The Yale connection is John W. Sterling. I got to say that because his law firm, 172 years later, decided to want to be the first pillar to give us seed money to start this museum. And if we all don't know who John W. Sterling is or was, he was a graduate of Yale University. He comes from this community in Stratford. And when he graduated in 1865, which was profound because we all know that the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, so to speak, maybe a decade later, he co-founded the law firm of Shearman and Sterling LLP. Now, John Sterling is the same John Sterling that donated $15 million to Yale University, which built the Sterling Memorial Library, built the law school at Yale, and the same office on the corner of Grove and Temple, mm-hmm. where I was sitting with the Secretary of Yale yesterday. So we have rich history with Yale, and there is a nexus. Even though we're not in New Haven, there is a nexus. And we will be moving into John W. Sterling's childhood home, which is a 9,000 square foot mansion in the historic resident, and by next year this time. Wow. And the last part of this is that there's a Yale connection because Colchester, my hometown where I come from, we have now started the conversation, and we're in the developing plans of bringing the second African-American History Museum to Connecticut. Who'd ever thunk it? I mean, when it rains, it pours, right? But you know what? I'm not crying over the fact that we have an opportunity to bring two institutions for learning and understanding and being a part of what we're trying to do and bridging the gap and telling our narrative.
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations. I'm sure your parents are just smiling in heaven. That's amazing.
Or they're saying, boy, we hope you didn't bite off more than you can chew. But you know what? It keeps me busy, it keeps me alert, it keeps me alive, and it's I wouldn't have it any other way. But you can't beat what's getting ready to happen here. And those both institutions are going to serve everybody in the state of Connecticut, not just Colchester or Stratford, but they're going to be destinations where you can have receptions. You can bring folks when they come to town. You don't have to bring them to, the Dewdrop Inn and have a little reception at the Omni. Nothing wrong with the Omni, but we'd like to have things that relate and look like who we are and what we have achieved. So that was one of the reasons why also that I feel we need to have a building of some sort or an institution that we all can cherish and respect.
Wow, that's amazing, and thank you. My next question is: out of all your collections, or your pieces, which one stands out the most, if there is one in particular?
That's you know what, Gary, I got to tell you, whenever I have been interviewed or folks have come to this museum and their cameras, and I think Keith Kuntz asked me that last week.
Mm-hmm.
Because Channel 8 is very involved with us, and they're going to be doing a segment on Black History Month and taping next week for Black History Month here. So the production crew will be here for that. He asked me that question. Others have asked me that question. It's kind of like when you ask a mother, and she has several children, who's her favorite child, right?
The baby.
So that was a loaded question, but I hope I can answer. They're all significant. They're all important. From the smallest thing that I showed you just now to the most hideous thing that sits in my office. That when you came and sat down, you didn't expect to see a mannequin with a hood and a robe and a sash on it, and I saw you do a double take. Like, man, what's up with this? So even that ugly, hideous, and despicable object we're alluding to is a vintage post-Civil War Ku Klux Klan hood and robe that was left here in a box. And when we opened the box, it said, "Your museum can tell this story better than my family." So we appreciate the family. If you're listening to us, thank you for that object. But yeah, I mean, every piece has a meaning, a strong meaning. But if you were to ask me which was the most inspirational exhibit, would be the Tuskegee Airmen exhibit, because these young men, they defied Jim Crow, left their universities, HBCU universities. Some of them graduated, some of them just left when World War II broke out, and they were dealing with Jim Crow. And if we know our HBCUs, they're located in the South. And the humiliation they had to go through, but when the war broke out, they felt they were patriotic enough that perhaps if they enlisted in the war and brought democracy to those countries to stamp out fascism, that they would be perceived and looked at as heroes and people who were just not second-class citizens any longer. But unbeknownst to them, when they got into the European theaters in Europe, they realized that Jim Crow was alive and well, where they were defied access to the amenities that officers, because these were officers, they weren't. They were in college. They were they literally would have been going through OCI, Officer Candidate School, OCS school, and they were reduced to sweeping floors, driving, chauffeuring, kitchen patrol, digging latrines. But again, I would say my most inspirational exhibit every morning that I have to pass in order to come up to my office is that exhibit. And I look at those young men and the determination in their eyes and saying, you know what, we will fight Jim Crow here in the United States as well as in Europe. And only to know when they came back, they were reduced to sitting in cattle cars while the German POWs that the camps were in the South, they were sitting in, the German POWs were sitting in passenger vehicles with seats and everything, while these gentlemen were sitting on crates and cattle cars. So long story short, I would say that would be a favorite exhibit, but also inspiring and motivating exhibit.
Wow. So when you speak of Jim Crow, I've come across a few folks, young and old, that really didn't know what Jim Crow meant. What would you say to them? If you could just, I know there's so much to it, but if you could.
I'm gonna simplify it. Don't think that Jim Crow, all right, first of all, we need to define Jim Crow was not a real person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jim Crow was an exaggerated, but a word that was used to keep blacks and whites from integrating. And those laws were real in signs, they were real in words, and so forth. But to put a little bit more context to this, how close Jim Crow was and is to us. And I got to say this, Jim Crow is alive and well, which was in my period 11 years ago, was James Crow Esquire, which was is now Jim Crow's nephew or grandson. Jim Crow was alive and well in New Haven at Church and Chapel Starbucks with me 11 years ago. As a uniformed African-American police officer, I was not allowed to use the bathroom at Starbucks at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning with a white partner. I was told that the key was in the safe and the key would not be taken out of the safe until after 12 o'clock. And only to learn, because I didn't want to use the color of my uniform and badge, to insist on getting a key, I left. Came back 5 minutes later. My partner didn't know I left and told me, he said, Fletch, you could use the bathroom. Why did you go out there? And I said, because the woman there told me the key was in the safe. He said, that's odd, because 5 minutes ago, this white gentleman in a black suit, white shirt and red tie, gave her the key back and she put it in her apron. And so when I asked her about it, she looked at me and didn't give me an answer. Long and short of the story, I went through the legal stuff, but then I decided to pull the case off the docket before Starbucks out in Seattle, Washington found out. And next thing I knew, that they were sending an email stating that we understand something happened, but we're not going to admit it. So in lieu of your inconvenience, here's $3,000, but in order for you to get the $3,000, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, never to talk about the case. Of course, I didn't take the money and I didn't sign a non-disclosure, because in my wisdom and in my mind, spiritually, I knew that I would be able to talk about Starbucks down the road, which was about 11, 12 years ago. And if I had taken that money, I would not be able to talk about this case right now. So when we talk about Jim Crow, that's as close as Jim Crow, I think. One of the cases I may have come with Jim Crow was with this. But for our young people, don't think for one moment that those same laws would not apply to you in the year of 2024. You may not see it so obvious, but it is done. It will be done in its practice as you and I are talking now, Gary. So those are Jim Crow laws.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. So if you could speak to some of your future plans and your past exhibits, just talk a little bit about
So the future plan is this. We're working on the segment to catapult the museum to a destination, but not only for Connecticut, but for the country to look at how this museum is evolving. So we're in a community where the politics and the demographics don't line up with mine, but the people who are in charge in this community have put their politics aside, put their cultures aside, and said, you know what, we really want this community. We want this in our community. We believe it is a start to something big. And so what I've been working on is getting a bipartisan relationship with the community as well as our state legislators, which is working, and which is giving us the attention, because in the climate that we are today in the United States, the politics and everything is polarized, the right versus the left versus the right, black versus white, white versus black, right? So what this museum is showing, as I said earlier, it's a litmus test, but the litmus test is turning out to be a positive, because we have bipartisan bipartisan politics working together in terms of trying to sustain this museum. And because it's here, it's not giving anyone a feather in the cap, right? It's not making the Republican side look great. It's not making the Democrat side look great. But in actuality, this community is galvanizing. But the schools, there's 2 high schools here, Bunnell and Stratford. There's a private school here. Fairfield Prep is now involved with us. And so my goal is, for the future, is to connect all of our schools. I don't care how far they are, how close they are. I want them to be able to utilize this museum as a resource, as a place where they can have their students come here, do research, come in contact with artifacts that they will never ever see up close and personal unless they are working within that venue. So we are strong in working with the youth, and so I mean we're just trying to sustain. I mean it's hard, you know. I need more of our people to be involved and support this like you would support going to a Beyonce concert or a Jay-Z concert, right? Open your checkbooks. Now I'm pleading, I'm begging, right? And you know, we're gonna sustain. We're gonna make this work, and you know, we're applying for grants. That's the other goal we're doing. We're on a major campaign funding for this museum as well as the other museum. We have a lot of grants that are in, but we need that support financially. But we also need bodies here too, right? Nobody's saying you have to have a degree in African American history. We have a diverse group of people that work here, from Black, white, Hispanic, women, men, retired people are willing to roll their sleeves up. And the great thing is that we have some great supporters of the museum in terms of partnerships with Wells Fargo Bank, Subway Foundation, which I give big shout out for, because they don't give us anything in money wise, but they give us money, give us certificates or cards to feed our students when they volunteer here, because I believe in not just having them come here and sit and do things that were arbitrarily mean nothing. I have them come here and they learn everything from A to Z, and at the end, towards the end of the day, we feed them. And I thank Subway for that. And it's a plug, yeah, because we get kids here that volunteer that we don't know their home life. And I have one story to tell real quickly, is that our volunteers, they're honor students, Black and white and Hispanic. They are honor students. And we have 2 that have now are freshmen at HBCUs. They work here. But during Christmas, when we came back from break, Christmas, we were closed a couple of days, and one of my volunteers showed up, and they show up too on Saturday mornings. And I said, how was your Christmas? And she said, oh, it was good. I said, did you eat a lot? And she looked at me and she said, no. I said, why? She said, I don't know. My parents didn't make Christmas. And so I said, what did you do? She said, I went to McDonald's and bought something. That broke my heart. And, you know, and again, we don't know the challenges economically that some of our kids come from, but if I can give them something to eat when they're here, I know I can rest when I go home, because it's nothing like not having any food. And I'm a little emotional about it, because this is a good child, senior, and it's just sad. And we can do more. And that's what I'm saying. I'm making that pledge to everybody that might be watching this. We can do more. And I'm trying to do what I can do. But this is not about Jeff Fletcher and his family. It's bigger than Jeff Fletcher. And I just want people to know that.
Wow. Well, I mean, when you spoke of the student you had you let me know if there's anything we could do. Even if we could set up with some of my partners, if we could set up a dinner or anything, just to kind of bring it home. It's I talk to young folks every day, and folks, we forget about our blessings sometime, and don't realize we're quick to judge, but we don't realize what the young folks are going through before they get to school, or during the holidays when they don't have those parents or families. And that's what it's all about. We talk about humanity and helping others and that's what my parents have always taught us.
Right.
Wow, that's deep, man.
Yeah, and the thing I want to tell folks, because there are people out here that don't understand how a 501c3 works, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you were to write a check to the museum, and I'm making the plug, the Ruby and Calvin Fletcher African American History Museum, right? When you come here, that money goes in. This is the foundation, right? That money will not see any part of me or my pockets. It goes straight into this museum, and we do have an accountant that keeps an eye on every penny that comes into this museum. I don't take a salary, right? Because I don't believe in it right now. He's dying because I'm not taking a salary. I refuse to until I know that these museums are going to be strong. They're going to be able to stand up, and then I might request $1, right? But I put in more money than I've received on the outside, but that's okay. We still can keep the lights and the heat on. That's all that matters to me. But that money does not see my pockets. It sees the foundation, and that's where that money goes to sustain this building as well as the next one coming. Because there are folks out there, Fletcher, man, you hitting it big. Fletcher ain't hitting it big. You don't get rich off of 501c3. So I just had to say that, and I know it took some of the light off of my previous conversation I just had about that young lady, but that's what this is about.
Yeah, well, you definitely have succeeded, and I see you're still moving. And if you could just speak to some of your tour schedules and your hours and events.
Well, so my admin person just left. She was under the weather, so I had to throw her out. We go over my calendar every week because it changes, right? And we have plateaued from kind of like leaving the basement. Now we're kind of like on the first floor. Now we're starting to move to the second floor in our second year, going into our third year rather. And we're blossoming. So upcoming schedule is I'll be on the road presenting to as far away as Cornwall, Connecticut, Preston, Connecticut, Norwich, Rocky Hill. And so I'm on the road starting in the beginning of the month, but also coming back here doing organizations and groups later in the afternoon. So I can be in Colchester at 9, but I'll be back here by 2. And then I'll be at a library at 6. So the upcoming schedule is going to be really critical because we're spending 2 weeks, as we have been the last 2 years in Middletown, Connecticut. I will be doing 13 schools in the city of Middletown, plus the high school. And those are 2-a-days. 2-a-days, I go in at 9, finish at 10:30, take a break for about an hour. I hit another school, and I keep going for 2 weeks straight. And then I'm the keynote speaker next week. I'm sorry, moderator next week for the MLK day down here in Stratford at the Baldwin Center. So, next month is, I'm taking a lot of vitamins, trying to get as much as I can, and keep my fingers crossed because when it's all said and done by the middle of March, I'll be able to sit back for a day and then pick it back up again. So I'd rather be busy as opposed to not busy and be known, this museum or these museums being known as a place that people are now starting to realize that, they can use us.
Wow. So I just wanted to mention too, I forgot there's a music part of your museum too. that I really was taken back as you're finishing up your tour. If you could speak to that briefly, we have 2 minutes left.
Yep, I see that real quick, and thank you for that. So yeah, the last part of the tour is called the Decades Room, and when you walk into that space, we purposely have music blaring and blazing only because we've drug you through the difficult parts of this museum. It's heavy stuff, hard stuff, but we want you to leave on a positive note. So when you walk into that last space, you're going to see celebrity pictures. You're going to see objects that my parents had, music, my dad's guitars, who couldn't play, but one note. But needless to say, and I see we're running out of time real quickly here, that music is that room is cathartic, and we want folks to leave on a happy note. And we call it the end to the beginning, right? Because we will be picking up on positive accolades of African Americans moving to the bigger museum.
Wow, that's amazing. I can't tell you enough. I thank you for your time.
For having me.
I encourage everybody. The address of the museum is 952 East Broadway, Stratford, Connecticut. It's I'm thinking right now. I'm thinking about the guitar. Yeah. Look up on the wall, and that you said that was your dad's guitar.
Both of them. There's 2 of them. He has 6 of them. We only put 2 up. He couldn't read a lick of music, but if you put him in a room by himself for about 45 minutes an hour, you come back and you swear he was either the musician, the artist, or part of the band. So he was quite talented. As most African American folks are, we don't do things by theory. We pick up on sight and hearing and tone.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Again, folks, if you're going to close out in a minute, I can't thank you enough for sharing your journey and sharing your museum with everyone. I look forward to the museum in Colchester, and I think you have another one. Is there another project you're working on?
As of saying, Colchester and Stratford building the other museum out by next year will be in the bigger museum. 2025 will be in the Colchester Museum. So and the hours here are Monday, Wednesdays, Thursdays, 10 to 3. Those are our winter hours, and on Saturdays, 10 to 3. And we're closed but I'm here every day. So if you drive by and you happen to be in the area and you see vehicles in the driveway, just come on up and ring the bell and somebody will let you in. We're not that big where we can't let folks come in on our days off. Wow,
that's amazing. Again, I just want to say goodbye and thank everyone for joining in, and thank you, Jeff. And
thank you, Gary. Appreciate it.
Thank
man.
you.
And we're gonna get you in. We got another exhibit, another conversation. We got to talk about enshrining you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Another rhythm for y'all to listen.
Right.
I'm never quitting on my mission. I'm gonna roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you're going. Better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you won't be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working. Open
right. Have a good day.
All right, man.
Your final version.
Take care.
I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road. Let's camera action.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.